Something is different about Rolex. No, it's not a scandal or a problem with the watches. It's something deeper that could end Rolex as we know it. Rolex didn't become the most powerful watch brand in the world by accident. It built a system so controlled, so disciplined, that it turned simple steel watches into status symbols people would wait years to buy. But that same system is starting to create something new: pressure. And if there's one thing history shows, it's that even the strongest systems don't break because they fail, they break because they get pushed too far. So the real question isn't whether Rolex is winning, it's whether it's winning in a way that can actually last. So, will they last? The symbol was built deliberately. The Rolex Submariner was introduced in 1953 as a functional dive watch, rated to 100 meters, built for underwater work, purchased by professional divers and military units who needed something that would not fail at depth. It was not intended to mean anything beyond what it did. It told time. It survived water. It worked. What happened over the following 7 decades is one of the most successful acts of meaning construction in the history of commercial objects. Sean Connery wore the Submariner as James Bond in 1962's Dr. No, not as a gadget, not as a plot point, simply as what his character wore, because it suited the profile of a man who operated in dangerous environments and required reliable equipment. That single association, repeated across 4 subsequent Bond films, embedded a specific meaning into the watch. The Submariner was not just a dive watch, it was what a certain kind of man wore. Competent, dangerous, unhurried. The watch did not chase the character. The character confirmed what the watch already was. What followed was the patient accumulation of the same kind of unplanned authenticity across decades. Steve McQueen at Le Mans, Paul Newman with the Daytona, a watch whose dial he wore casually enough that it became the most sought-after reference in the brand's history, sold at auction for $17.8 million, based entirely on one man's preference: explorers on Everest. Racing drivers, not because Rolex sponsored the sport, but because the men who drove fast for a living reached for functional, robust instruments they could trust. Each association added another layer of meaning to the symbol without ever seeming to try. Rolex watched all of this accumulate and made a decision. It would not allow the symbol to be diluted. No discount channels. No outlet strategies. No overproduction. The watch would remain scarce, the access would remain controlled, and the meaning would remain intact through the one mechanism that luxury brands have always used to protect their symbols: the maintenance of the distance between the object and the people who want it. The genius of this system was not in the scarcity itself. Plenty of brands attempt artificial scarcity and fail. The genius was in the combination of scarcity and genuine cultural depth. You had to wait to get the watch, yes, but the waiting felt meaningful because what you were waiting for had a real story behind it. The Submariner that sat behind glass in a dealer's case was actually the same design language that had gone to the ocean floor with professional divers and come back working. The Daytona that required a years-long relationship with an authorized dealer was, actually, the chronograph that Paul Newman wore until the bezel faded and the dial tropicalized, and the watch became one of the most beautiful objects ever made by time acting on metal. The waiting pointed at something real. That combination, authentic history, controlled access, consistent meaning, created a symbol that was not merely prestigious but defensible. You could explain to a skeptic why a steel watch was worth $10,000. The explanation had weight. The weight came from decades of genuine cultural accumulation, not from a marketing budget. The system worked for longer than anyone had a right to expect. And then it worked so well that it started to malfunction. The malfunction did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, in the form of a new kind of customer, one Rolex had never designed the system to serve. Then the symbol escaped. At some point in the mid-2010s, the Rolex Submariner crossed a threshold that brand managers do not have a term for, but immediately recognize when it happens. The watch stopped being aspirational in the way that scarcity creates aspiration, something specific, earned, understood, and started being aspirational in the way that ubiquity creates aspiration. It became the default answer to the question of what luxury looks like on a wrist. Hip-hop had been referencing Rolex for decades, but the references accelerated and broadened. The watch appeared not as a specific object with a specific history, but as a shorthand, a single word that communicated an entire category of arrival: Jay-Z, Kanye West, Drake. The Day-Date in yellow gold. The custom diamond-set Submariner. The Daytona on a wrist that cost more than the car outside. The references were not about the watch. They were about what the watch meant to see. Rolex had become the simplest possible luxury signifier in the most widely consumed cultural medium on Earth. Rolex itself was uncomfortable with this, having distanced itself from hip-hop for decades, maintaining the grass court sponsor, the tennis and golf identity that had always defined its official cultural positioning. But a brand cannot choose its cultural associations when its product has become genuinely universal. The Submariner did not belong to Rolex's preferred world anymore. It belonged to everyone who could afford it, and the image of who that was had shifted dramatically from the retiring professional to the young person for whom the watch was a statement of something else entirely. Not competence or tradition, but arrival, defiance, the specific triumph of having earned enough to wear what the wealthy had always worn. The Instagram era compressed this further. The Submariner on a wrist in a photograph communicated the same thing, regardless of who wore it, regardless of whether they had waited 3 years for an allocation or bought it on the gray market that morning. The symbol was now transferable, detached from the story of how it was obtained. Available, effectively, to anyone with the money, which is precisely what luxury symbols are not supposed to be. The COVID pandemic accelerated everything. Young buyers, spending more time online and with fewer traditional outlets for discretionary income, flooded the secondary market. Some models briefly traded at 10 times their pre-pandemic retail prices. The Submariner became a speculative asset. Flippers acquired watches not because they wanted to wear them, but because the secondary market guaranteed a return. The Daytona, already the most coveted reference in the catalog, became a financial instrument discussed in the same breath as cryptocurrency and NFTs. What this created was a new majority customer for Rolex, one that had not grown up wanting this specific watch for its specific history and meaning, one that wanted it because wanting it was what people like them did. The social currency of the brand had become so widely recognized that it attracted customers whose relationship with the object was entirely mediated by that recognition. They were not buying a watch. They were buying a photograph of a watch on their wrist. They were buying the story of having gotten one. This is the customer Rolex built, not intentionally. The brand's own success constructed this person, the way a fire builds its own wind. And here is the structural problem that nobody inside the system has an easy answer for. The brand cannot tell the difference. The Rolex authorized dealer cannot distinguish, in any systematic way, between the buyer who has spent 2 decades learning what makes a 1016 Explorer valuable and the buyer who wants to flip the Submariner within a year. Both show up to the same appointment. Both produce the same purchase history if they have played the game correctly. Both leave with the same watch. The symbol treats them identically because it has no choice. A watch cannot interrogate its wearer's motives. What this means in practice is that the meaning Rolex built over 70 years now subsidizes customers who do not care about that meaning at all. They benefit from the cultural weight without contributing to it. And as their proportion of the customer base grows, the signal that the watch sends becomes increasingly mixed, increasingly generic, increasingly detached from the original story that made the whole system worth participating in. The new customer changed the energy around the brand, not visibly, not in a way that showed up in revenue, but in a way that the people who had loved the brand longest could feel immediately. What the symbol started to cost. Symbols carry meaning the way currency carries value, through collective agreement. When everyone believes a currency is worth something, it is worth something. When the agreement starts to crack, the value follows. The crack does not have to be large. It does not have to be visible to outsiders. The people who know the currency best feel it first. The people who knew Rolex best started feeling it during the bubble years, when the brand they had spent a decade loving and learning became, seemingly overnight, the brand of the flipper and the social media flex. The watch forums, spaces where serious collectors had discussed reference variations and movement architecture at 2 in the morning for years, were filled with a different kind of conversation. Pricing strategy, resale timelines, how to present yourself to an authorized dealer to maximize allocation probability. The language of love had become the language of extraction. Something important happened in that shift that is easy to miss. Rolex did not cause it, but Rolex had engineered the conditions for it. The artificial scarcity that kept the symbol potent also guaranteed that when speculative energy entered the market, it would find no release valve. There was no way to simply buy the watch. Every obstacle the brand had constructed to protect the meaning of ownership became an obstacle that made flipping more profitable and genuine enthusiasm more exhausting. The enthusiast, the person who had wanted this specific watch for a specific reason, those who had read the history, who had cared about which reference and what bracelet and what dial configuration, now competed with an entity that had no attachment to any of those things and a purely financial relationship with the outcome. The enthusiast lost. Not every time, but often enough that the experience of trying to own a Rolex through legitimate channels began to feel less like the culmination of genuine desire and more like a test of commercial obedience. That feeling has a name in consumer psychology: buyer fatigue, and it does not arrive dramatically. It arrives as a gradual diminishment of the impulse to try. The moment a person thinks "I am over it" without any specific triggering event, without a scandal, without a price increase that finally crossed a line, without a single identifiable moment of decision, is the moment the symbol has lost one customer permanently, not to a competitor, to exhaustion. Picture a person, someone who started wanting a Submariner in 2018, who read everything, who learned the references, who visited the authorized dealer and had the conversation and understood, correctly, that the path ran through relationship building and patience, who spent 3 years buying entry pieces and attending events and cultivating exactly the dynamic the system rewarded, who finally got the call, and who, sitting in the dealer's chair with the watch on their wrist, felt, for the first time in 3 years, not the arrival they had imagined, but a faint hollowness. The watch was everything they knew it would be. The moment was not. Because somewhere in those 3 years of wanting, they had seen the same watch on the wrist of someone who had simply paid above retail through a gray market channel and felt nothing particular about it. Had seen it used as a thumbnail prop in 100 content videos, had seen it on the Instagram grid of a person whose relationship with the object was purely transactional. The watch had not changed. The meaning had diluted while they were waiting. They bought the watch. Some do not. The ones who do not, who finally get the call and say, "Actually, I think I'll pass," are not angry at Rolex. They are simply done. That is the subtle catastrophe. Anger is recoverable. Exhaustion is not. The most dangerous form of customer loss is the one that looks like nothing. No complaint, no review, no cancellation email. Just a person who stopped trying, quietly and permanently, without ever explaining why. Rolex has no mechanism to detect this. No exit survey, no churn metric, no data point that captures the moment desire exhausted itself. The only signal is the secondary market cooling on certain references, the conversations turning from excitement to analysis, the shift from "I need to get one" to "I used to want one of those." If you had the money right now and could bypass the whole process, would you still go through the Rolex system? Or would you just buy something else? I want to know where people actually stand on this. Drop it below. Desire does not die from rejection. That is the counterintuitive part. It dies from the slow accumulation of friction that makes the reward feel less worth the effort. The generation that learned to want differently. Here is a data point that no Rolex press release will ever reference. Among Gen Z buyers on the secondary market in the first half of 2025, Cartier's share of total purchases rose from 1.7% in 2018 to 6.8%, a fourfold increase in 7 years. The brand leading that gain is not the Cartier of complicated movements and high horology. It is the Cartier of the tank, the Santos Dumont, the Panther, watches that are smaller, dressier, more distinctly individual, and demonstrably not a Submariner. Gen Z did not abandon luxury watches. They are buying more of them, spending more on them, and arriving in the market younger than any preceding generation. Survey data from 2024 found 41% of Gen Z respondents had acquired a luxury watch in the previous 12 months. Their average target purchase price, just under $11,000, exceeds what millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers say they would spend. These are serious buyers. They are simply not buying the same thing. What they are buying is individuality. The steel sports watch on an integrated bracelet, the category that Rolex dominated for a decade, is experiencing a generational reversal. Gen Z has introduced faster, fashion-like cycles to a category long considered immune to rapid shifts. They treat watches the way preceding generations treated jewelry, as objects of self-expression rather than signals of institutional achievement. They stack them, They wear them on straps. They choose the watch that photographs interestingly, rather than the watch that signals most legibly to the most people. The Submariner photographs as Rolex. Full stop. Its legibility is total and immediate, which is precisely the property that made it the dominant luxury watch of the previous 2 decades. But total legibility, in the aesthetic economy of a generation raised on radical individualism, translates to the worst possible quality a luxury object can have: predictability. The generation entering peak purchasing power over the next decade grew up in a world where the Submariner was already everywhere. On their parents' wrists, on their professors, in every aspirational Instagram grid from 2015 onward, in the background of 1,000 wealth-signaling photographs. For a generation whose entire aesthetic vocabulary is organized around refusing to inherit the symbolic language of the one before them, the most powerful luxury watch brand on Earth carries a specific disadvantage. It means exactly what everyone already knows it means. There is no discovery in a Submariner for a 24-year-old in 2026. No moment of recognition. No sense of having found something that rewards attention. The watch is simply already known, already legible, already finished. What that generation is reaching for instead is more interesting to watch than any Rolex release. Vintage dress watches with patinated dials and cases that carry the physical evidence of time. Small sizes. Gold that reads as jewelry rather than armor. Watches that require explanation, that invite the question, what is that? Rather than delivering the immediate recognition of, ah, Rolex, the Cartier Panther, the vintage Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, the FP Journe Chronometer Blue. Objects that carry genuine individuality not because they are more expensive than a Submariner, some of them are not, but because they are not obvious. They reward the person who recognizes them and exclude the person who does not, which is the original function of a status symbol before it becomes the default. Rolex can wait out a market correction. It has done it before. Rolex can wait out a market correction. It has done it before. What is harder to wait out is a generational shift in what status is supposed to feel like and what makes a symbol worth wearing. The consistency that became a cage, Rolex's greatest competitive advantage, the feature no competitor has successfully replicated, is the consistency of its identity across decades. The Submariner in 2026 is unmistakably the Submariner of 1953. The evolution has been incremental, technical, invisible to anyone not looking closely. Ceramic bezels replaced aluminum, movements improved, water resistance increased. The watch is meaningfully better in every functional respect, but it looks the same. It means the same thing. This is extraordinary. Most brands cannot hold a design language for 5 years without drifting. Rolex has held one for 70. And that consistency is precisely why the symbol retained its value through cultural shifts that destroyed other luxury identities. The problem is that consistency, taken to its absolute limit, is indistinguishable from stasis. And stasis, in a culture where a trend cycle that once took a decade now takes 18 months, reads not as timelessness but as absence of conversation. The watch community noticed this before the mainstream did. Every year it watches and wonders, the same pattern. Rolex announced exactly what everyone expected, in exactly the colors the forums had predicted, in exactly the configurations the market demanded. Not because Rolex had leaked anything, because Rolex had become so consistent that prediction was trivial. A new dial color on the Datejust, a bezel variation on an existing GMT configuration. The Land Dweller in 2025 was the first genuine exception in over a decade. It has an entirely new collection, a new movement architecture, a new design language, and the market's response, a secondary premium of 70% within months of launch, illustrated precisely how starved the audience had become for something genuinely unexpected from a brand they thought they already knew. The independents understood something about this dynamic before Rolex did. FP, Journe, H. Moser, MB, and F. de Bethune. These brands have built entire identities on doing the opposite of what Rolex does, not out of contrarianism, but because there is a growing market for the feeling that a watch contains a genuine point of view, an argument about what watchmaking should be doing, a personality rather than a position. That market is growing fastest in the segment that matters most for the next decade. The collector who shapes what other collectors want. The independent segment is not, in absolute revenue terms, a threat to Rolex. FP Journe sells thousands of watches per year. Rolex sells approximately 1 million. The commercial comparison is not the point. The cultural comparison is. The people who write about watches, who set the aesthetic conversation for the collector community, who determine what becomes desirable 3 years before it becomes mainstream, those people are increasingly interested in what independent watchmakers are doing and decreasingly interested in what Rolex will release next. Not because Rolex's output is inferior, because its output is predictable. And the watch that contains a surprise, a new way of displaying time, a movement architecture that has never existed before, a case shape that requires justification, generates the kind of attention that a seventh iteration of an existing reference cannot. This matters because the luxury watch market runs on enthusiasm before it runs on money. Money follows enthusiasm. Enthusiasm follows conversation. And the conversation has been moving quietly and consistently toward brands that take risks. When the tastemakers leave for somewhere more interesting, the mainstream follows. It takes time, but it follows. And underneath all of this, underneath the generational shifts and the symbol fatigue and the predictability, there is the deepest problem of all. The one that no brand can engineer its way out of. When a symbol wins too completely, there is a concept in semiotics, the study of signs and meaning, called sign saturation. It describes what happens when a sign becomes so widely used that its meaning collapses under the weight of its own ubiquity. The sign still functions. People still recognize it. But the recognition no longer carries the specific content the sign was originally deployed to convey. It carries only the recognition itself. The Rolex crown is, in 2026, the most recognizable mark in the luxury watch world. Put it on a wrist anywhere on Earth, and the status communication is immediate. The problem is that the communication has become so broad as to be nearly content-free. Consider the range of characters who have been defined, in part, by a Rolex on their wrist. James Bond, the original carrier of the symbol, whose relationship with the watch communicated competence and danger. Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, whose Rolex day date was a detail in a satire of status culture so sharp that the film remains uncomfortable 40 years later. The retiring dentist at the golf club. The first-generation immigrant who saved for a decade. The 22-year-old day trader who bought it with a margin account in 2021. The Instagram influencer who receives it on loan for content. The flipper who wears it for 48 hours between acquisition and resale. The watch contains all of these people simultaneously. It cannot sort them. And a symbol that cannot sort is not functioning as a symbol. It is functioning as a flag, something you fly to indicate membership in a very large group, which is the opposite of what luxury status symbols are supposed to do. This is the observation that gets closest to the heart of the problem, and it is the observation that Rolex has the least ability to act on. The brand can control production. It can control distribution. It cannot control the cultural meaning that accumulates around its product once that product has been adopted widely enough to escape the original context. The Submariner spent 70 years accumulating specific meaning. It has spent the last decade spending that meaning down, not through any fault of the brand, but simply by becoming the default choice of a culture that needed a default. What makes this moment genuinely uncomfortable for anyone thinking clearly about the brand is that there is no obvious move available. The options that would address symbol saturation all require doing something antithetical to the system that created the saturation. You cannot restrict the meaning of a symbol that is already everywhere. You cannot make a watch feel rare once it has become the default. You cannot engineer desire in a generation that already knows exactly what you are engineering and finds the transparency of the engineering itself less interesting than brands that have found a way to be genuinely surprising. The brand that built the most disciplined system in luxury history is now facing a problem that discipline alone cannot solve. Because the problem is not what Rolex did, it is what Rolex became. Every luxury brand failure story that gets told begins with a mistake, an overextension, a wrong product, a dilution decision made under revenue pressure, a founder's vision corrupted by a corporation that did not understand it. These are the stories that satisfy because they have a villain and a lesson and a clear moment where things could have gone differently. Rolex's story has neither. The brand made the right call at every decision point that mattered. It protected the symbol. It maintained the discipline. It refused the shortcuts that destroyed other brands. It built a system so effective that it became the case study by which every other luxury brand measures its own ambitions. And the system worked so well that the symbol escaped containment. The Rolex Submariner now means too much, to too many people who mean too many different things. It has been worn by everyone from genuine adventurers to social media strategists who treat it as a content prop, and it can no longer distinguish between them. A generation is arriving that finds its ubiquity more claustrophobic than aspirational. They are spending their money on watches that feel like a personality rather than a position. And the brand built on saying no to growth, on protecting meaning through scarcity, is now confronting the one form of dilution its system was never designed to prevent. Not overproduction, not discounting, not the outlet mall. Something quieter and more permanent. The slow erosion of what the crown means when it means the same thing to everyone. There is a specific irony in where this lands. Rolex spent decades building a symbol so powerful that it transcended the product. The watch became incidental, a physical object that carried a meaning far larger than itself. James Bond's competence, Paul Newman's taste, the self-made arrival of people who had worked for something real. These meanings accumulated without Rolex paying for them, and they protected the brand through every market cycle and cultural shift for 70 years. What the brand could not protect against was the meaning becoming too available, too easily adopted by people who had not earned it in the original sense of that word, not financially, but culturally, through the accumulation of genuine knowledge and genuine desire. The symbol that had always been about a specific kind of person stopped being about that person. It became about whoever wore it, and whoever wore it was, increasingly, everyone. Rolex will endure. The crown will remain legible. 33.7% of the secondary market does not evaporate overnight. But the thing Rolex has always actually sold, not a watch, not a mechanical instrument, but the specific feeling of wearing a symbol that means something precise to the right people, that thing is becoming harder to deliver at the price the brand has always charged for it. Because the price was never the money. The price was the meaning. And meanings, unlike oyster steel cases, do not stay watertight forever. So, let us know what you think in the comments, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.